Friday, starting at noon Eastern time today. We're going to give you some scoops as far as Florida State is concerned. Florida State football, the coaching situation with Willie Taggart. I'm going to get to that in a second. We teased that on Twitter. Also coming up today, we're going to talk to arguably one of the best people in the country to talk college basketball with, if not the best, when it comes to breaking news. Jeff Goodman of Stadium will be joining us here shortly to try to make sense all of the news coming out of the Kansas basketball program and, of course, the NCAA and what may rain down on other programs in the future as it pertains to allegations of major violations by the Kansas basketball program as it pertains to an FBI and DOJ investigation. The notice of allegations has just come down from the NCAA. Bill Self is right in the middle of all of these allegations, with the implication being that he lost control of that program, a massive quid pro quo as it pertains to Self and Adidas. That certainly is the indication. We're going to talk to Jeff Goodman about that situation, find out what the hell it means, what's going to happen to Bill Self, what's going to happen to Kansas, what's going to happen to other programs. They're going to have similar allegations coming down against them. That's going to be coming up here in just a few minutes. Also, coming up later in the show, we're going to talk to the oracle of the Dallas Cowboys, if you will, Clarence Hill Jr., who's also a major fixture on Twitter. Guy you got to follow on Twitter. All these people. I mean, that's a lot of the way you find out about these individuals as far as I'm concerned. But Clarence Hill Jr., who we'll talk Cowboys with, is coming up later in this hour, approaching the bottom of the hour. And we're going to be talking some barbecue. We're going to talk boxing with Clarence as well, with the Spence Porter fight coming up. We'll talk some football, the emergence of SMU perhaps. We'll talk Texas football as well with a man right in the heart of Texas, Clarence Hill Jr. That's coming up. And, of course, no better person to ask right now. He covers the Cowboys every single day. No better person to ask about the Dak Prescott contract situation and the Amari Cooper contract situation, which, who knows, may come up before it's all over, before the season is over, cause some controversy with the Cowboys as they go along and seemingly bumping right along at the top of the NFC on their way perhaps to a Super Bowl appearance. I also want to get his thoughts on, of course, Cowboy rival, the Washington Redskins, and their awful performance last night against the Chicago Bears. And then later in the show, if you're a Tennessee football fan and you're revisiting our show today, we talked about a scoop that we had for you yesterday on this show. Peyton Manning, of course, Hall of Fame, NFL quarterback, former Tennessee star, I've been told by multiple sources, is involved in canvassing for possible candidates under the auspices of the University of Tennessee Athletic Department Athletic Director Phil Fulmer for potential head coaching candidates in the event, the increasingly likely event, that Jeremy Pruitt is fired as coach of Tennessee. Also, another column came out as it pertains to the coaching situation in Tennessee by the esteemed Yahoo Sports, former Boston Globe columnist and former Sports Illustrated reporter Pete Thamel. He had a column that came out in Yahoo Sports on Sunday where he talked about Phil Fulmer potentially taking over as the head football coach at Tennessee. Pete Thamel, again, this guy is a blue blood of college football reporters. Currently at Yahoo Sports, does a lot of investigative journalism. He called Phil Fulmer in his column a backstabber and said that Fulmer is poised to take over as the head football coach. Of course, Fulmer was the coach of Peyton Manning at Tennessee himself. And it has seemed, and I'm going to talk to Tony Basilio, the longtime fixture in Knoxville and Tennessee football and basketball observer. He hosts his own radio show every single weekday in Knoxville and has for years. We're going to talk to him later on in the show about Peyton Manning's relationship with Phil Fulmer, because from what I understand, what Peyton is doing in terms of locating candidates, reaching out to them perhaps on the sly or not on the sly, What is Peyton Manning's relationship with Philip Fulmer in this situation? I happen to have a pretty good idea what the answer to that question is, but I want to get the perspective from Knoxville and Tony Basilio. That's coming up later in the show. I will say, to preface that whole situation, that from what I understand, Philip Fulmer has been working in concert with Peyton Manning as it pertains to finding a possible coaching replacement in the future for Jeremy Pruitt, who, of course, has a brutal schedule coming up as far as the Tennessee football team is concerned. They've got to play Alabama. They've got to play Georgia. They've got Mississippi State coming up. So it is a gauntlet for Tennessee football. And you're looking at a 2 to 3 win season, perhaps. And, of course, when you talk about a Vanderbilt blew out Tennessee last year. Of course, Tennessee beat Kentucky last season. But after seeing Tennessee's offensive performance or lack thereof against Florida, it makes you wonder what's going to happen to Jeremy Pruitt, because the offense was so anemic. The quarterback situation is so bad at Tennessee. You really have to wonder about that team going forward. And the fact that someone like Pete Thamel is coming out and saying that Phil Fulmer is potentially going to be taking over in the middle of the season. And, of course, that would, in all likelihood, I would imagine, be on an interim basis. I think that Pruitt's going to be gone sooner than later. And what's also interesting about that situation is if Phil Fulmer is going to come in and take over as head football coach in the middle of the season for Tennessee, perhaps that takes some heat off Phil Fulmer himself. Perhaps that distracts from Phil Fulmer, because there's been calls for Phil Fulmer's head as the athletic director, as he has presided over a succession of bad hires, including, of course, Butch Jones, most recently, a hire that turned out rather poorly, of course. And then you had a situation with Greg Schiano. That didn't happen either. That was a well-publicized kerfuffle, I guess you could say, for the Tennessee football program, about as ugly as it could get. And that's why we have Jeremy Pruitt now as the head coach. And it doesn't look like he's going to be a good fit. So that's coming up later in the show. Tony Basilio is going to talk to us about the Tennessee football program on the field, off the field. Nobody is going to give you a better idea of what's going on than Tony Basilio. He has his hand on the pulse. But before we get to all of those guests, I want to talk about the Florida State football situation. This is, again, breaking news. This is a scoop. This is something that in myself, canvassing the media, canvassing the press, looking back in the archives, looking back recently, making phone calls. I haven't seen anybody talking about this specifically or reporting it. But I can tell you for a fact that SportsbyBrooks has learned that Deion Sanders, former Florida State Seminole, NFL great, was in large part behind the move to bring Willie Taggart to Florida State as the head football coach. But now, from what I understand, Deion Sanders has been making the rounds, making phone calls, looking for possible replacements now for Willie Taggart. The problem that Deion Sanders has with the Florida State administration and with the trustees is that his credibility now after the Willie Taggart hire is somewhat on the wane. And it's interesting to note that Sanders' son Shiloh at one point seemingly was leaning to Florida State in 2018. Shiloh Sanders is now a college football player at the University of South Carolina. Sanders' son Shiloh was offered a scholarship by Willie Taggart at Florida State, but eventually backed off committing to the Seminoles and moved on to South Carolina. Deion Sanders also has a arrangement with Under Armour, a sponsorship deal, if you will, unto himself. And Florida State is a Nike school. So that possibly was in play when it came to Shiloh Sanders deciding not to go to Florida State. But in all likelihood, it may have been the fact that Willie Taggart didn't look like he might be the long-term answer at Florida State. Thus, Shiloh Sanders moves on, the son of Deion Sanders, to South Carolina. But make no mistake, Deion Sanders has been a puppet master behind the scenes at Florida State. And from what I'm told, my sources are telling Sports by Brooks, me, Brooks, that Deion Sanders is the guy who made the call on Willie Taggart, and now he is actively out trying to find possible replacements in the event that Willie Taggart doesn't make it at Florida State. And certainly right now, it doesn't look good. Of course, he's got that ACC schedule, so you would think Florida State's going to right the ship and maybe not play better, but play inferior competition. If that happens, Willie Taggart may make it. But for now, at least through the season. But it's an unmitigated disaster right now at Florida State. And Florida State is not a program for people wondering. If you're a Florida State fan out there watching right now and you're wondering, what about candidates? Who wants to come to Florida State? What's the nature of the job at Florida State? Who would be interested? Well, there's not a lot of people interested that you've heard of. Unless they're retread coaches, you're looking at a top offensive assistant. And to be honest, the top offensive assistants that I'm aware of and talking to sources aren't interested in that Florida State job. It's going to be a tough sell to bring in a coach who is flying high, who is doing well as a head coach. I would say it's going to be a coach from a very low-level FBS program or an FCS coach as a head coach who you may be looking at. As far as high-profile assistants are concerned, again, Florida State, a little bit like Tennessee, might be in somewhat of a better situation, to be honest, because although Florida State's facilities amongst elite or at least past elite FBS programs are at the bottom of the barrel, the recruiting ground, of course, geographically for Florida State is extremely favorable. So it is something that you could rebuild almost overnight. And as you rebuild that program, perhaps the funds begin to flow from the ACC network, from donors, from trustees, whatever it may be. You're able to build those facilities where they should be as far as Florida State is concerned. But that's a big problem. There's also been a problem, and I've heard whispers of this from some of my sources just over the last couple of months, that in the past, African-American coaches who have been involved at Florida State, it's not the most amenable situation for high-profile African-American coaches or perhaps on the staff at Florida State. I'm not making any specific accusations. I'm just telling you from anecdotal conversations that I've had with people who are close to some of the coaching candidates that may be in play for Florida State. You've got an African-American coach right now who's really struggling in Willie Taggart, and perhaps the succession plan in Florida State. I'm certainly not saying Florida State wouldn't consider bringing in an African-American coach and that wouldn't be a possibility. I'm saying that from my anecdotal conversations that I've had with people who may or may not be in contact with this situation, it's not the most favorable place perhaps for an African-American coach to go into, especially following the debacle that currently is Willie Taggart. Is Willie Taggart going to get this thing turned around? Perhaps. Maybe this is a moot conversation, but I can tell you as an exclusive here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred that Deion Sanders is involved in trying to extricate Florida State out of this disastrous situation in terms of reaching out, canvassing for possible candidates. I'm not saying Deion Sanders is firing Willie Taggart. I'm not saying that Deion Sanders has the juice necessarily that he had in the past when he was able to affect that hire. But I am saying that he remains involved, despite the fact that his son, Shiloh Sanders, who was in play for Florida State, did indicate some interest in Florida State, went to South Carolina, now is not there. So coming up, we're going to talk to Jeff Goodman, who's up in Boston, and he's with Stadium. Jeff Goodman, one of the preeminent breaking news reporters in college basketball, one of the more, if not the most knowledgeable college basketball reporter out there. And he's going to help us make sense of what is potentially a disastrous situation for the Kansas Jayhawks basketball program and a reckoning for college basketball in general. That's going to be coming up here in a few minutes. We'll talk to him about a notice of allegations that Kansas has recently received from the NCAA, this in the past week, that indicates that Kansas could be looking at some dire penalties, some serious sanctions that could certainly cause a major problem for that program. I also want to talk to Jeff Goodman about Bill Self, particularly who's been charged with a lack of control over that program by the NCAA, despite the fact that all indications are from the federal investigation that Bill Self did not have direct knowledge of any payments that were flowing between Adidas representatives and or boosters and recruits. Of course, this could be a much bigger issue with other programs as we go forward. Just keep that in mind. And that's something that I hope to ask Jeff about as well. Some of the other programs that may be facing similar charges, similar allegations in what could amount to a power play between the NCAA and college basketball schools. This may be a situation where the NCAA is striking upon this situation as it pertains to the FBI to, I suppose, let the other college basketball schools out there, or let college basketball schools out there understand that the NCAA is indeed the sheriff. They are indeed in charge. And this may be an opportunity for the NCAA to reassert that power and that control over the schools. And now Jeff Goodman joins us. Jeff, how you doing, man? I appreciate it.
No, anytime. You know that. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Are you in Boston today?
I am. It's actually nice here.
Oh, wow. You got a nice long summer, right?
It'll turn soon. We got about another week of good weather, and then it gets, pretty crappy. And I always, come winter, start to wonder why the hell I still live in Boston.
Don't we all? I've lived in Kansas City. I've lived in the north. I've lived on the East Coast, but now we're out in Los Angeles where you extract the weather from your life. It's a wonderful feeling. When you talk about the storm coming on here in the next couple of weeks, I mean, that's the situation with the Kansas Jayhawks basketball program. Lay out to us what's played out this week.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is they got the notice of allegations, and everybody knew it was coming. You just didn't know when, and that kind of starts the ball rolling here for the NCAA. And they hit Kansas with several level 1 violations. They hit Kansas with a lack of institutional control. They hit Bill Self with several level 1 violations, and those are the most serious. That's as bad as you can get hit. That's what they've gotten hit, but we don't know what the penalties are yet, and we're not going to know for months here. And that's what I was trying to say over Twitter is like everybody's going to get up in arms right now. But these violations could translate to a 2-year suspension for Bill Self. They could translate to a 10-game suspension for Bill Self. We don't know until the process gets going. And again, this is the first step. Now they get to appeal. They have 90 days. The school does to appeal to the NCAA. Then NCAA has 60 days to reply. Then you go into the Committee of Infractions report, and that whole process can take, again, until the actual discipline. We could be talking a year from today, legitimately a year before we know what the discipline is going to be to Kansas and Bill Self.
So this is almost like a foreign language, looking at these allegations and trying to make sense of these, especially if you're not following college basketball closely. But essentially what's happening here is coming out of an FBI investigation. The allegation is that Adidas, representatives of Adidas, were essentially paying recruits, steering recruits, and Bill Self didn't know anything about it. So if Bill Self didn't know anything about it, why is he being charged with anything by the NCAA?
Well, I mean, again, the NCAA, do they believe TJ Gassnell, the Adidas rep, who was on the stand? And that's where they got all their information from here when he says that Bill Self didn't know anything about it. Or does the NCAA just say, like, he should have known? You should know what goes on in your program. Listen, in so many cases like this, the head coaches are turning a blind eye. They know these guys are helping them, whether it's Adidas for Kansas, whether it's Adidas for some of these other schools that they helped as well. Nike, as I mentioned.
The family. Yeah, family, right? I mean, what is it? The Nike schools have family.
Oregon. You don't think Oregon, Kentucky, and Duke are getting help daily from Nike, from people that work at Nike?
But what we're talking about here, Jeff, is we're talking about essentially assembling recruiting classes for these schools, are we not?
Of course. I mean, again, like the rich get richer. the guys at Nike know where their bread is buttered. They want those top kids, a lot of them, to go to those power schools. The difference here is Adidas and TJ Gassnola got caught. Nike's been doing this. We know that. They haven't gotten caught yet. That's the big differentiator here. And Kansas was in the middle of all this. And again, Gassnola paid Billy Preston's mother a substantial amount of money, and the proof is there. So the NCAA has that with Adidas, with Kansas. Don't have Bill Self being involved in it. They have, again, basically saying that he's got a pattern of non-compliance. And that's kind of what they're going to hit him with. They can, like Rick Pitino, right? He should have known about the strippers in the dorm. Did you know? Did you not know? Does it really matter at the end of the day? Because you should have known.
But to me, this is really I don't want to call it cataclysmic because, everybody has always known about the under the table stuff. But now when you look at Adidas and you look at the widespread nature of what we're talking about, obviously you're going to have a Nike, you're going to have an Under Armour involved. And where does this all start? How do we start off to the point where Adidas, Under Armour, and Nike have this kind of influence just besides the money?
Well, again, they're around all these kids.
I mean, how has it started when they're 10 years old? Does it start at AAU and then the cultivation? Yeah. So essentially, these AAU teams spring up and they revolve around the shoe companies, apparel companies. And so they build these relationships, and then there's a pipeline depending on what AAU team. Is that how it works?
Yeah, there's a kid right now, a kid named Amani Bates. He's from the Midwest. He's the next best thing, right? I mean, he's the closest thing that I've seen at that age to Kevin Durant in terms of how smooth he is. So already he's on the Nike circuit. So all the Nike people have already kind of infiltrated him and his family. So they're making sure he's got everything he needs. The father runs the program. So Nike is essentially, and they did this with Marvin Bagley's father as well, they're paying the parent to run the program. So they're on the payroll and paying them legally. That's what I don't understand that Adidas didn't do and everybody doesn't do. If legally, I can tell you're the father of a top kid. And I say, either you can run, I don't care if you know anything about basketball. I'm going to pay you a certain amount of money legally, and you're going to run this program. And you're going to get some money. Let's face it, like the program, certainly it costs some money to run it, go to these events, whatever.
Well, and it's all veiled in charity, is it not?
Yeah, a lot of it
is. Charitable organizations.
That's right. So, to me, that's how this thing works is, again, the shoe companies, the people at the grassroots level, they're around these kids all the time because these kids are playing AAU from April through the end of July. They're with the AAU coaches. They're with the Nike people or the Adidas people or the Under Armour people, whoever it is. Those are the people that have influence. Why? They're giving them everything, whether it's sneakers on the up and up. It could just be, gear. And then obviously we know in many cases it's beyond gear. It's money. It's, you hear stories of kids jumping from AAU team to AAU team, even back when Sebastian Telfair, when I really covered recruiting, he jumped from team to team and they pay him, it could be $500 for a weekend just to go play with a different AAU team.
It's amazing. And when you look at the charitable organizations, that's a way for these companies to so-called donate to these AAU teams. So we're visiting with Jeff Goodman of Stadium. We're talking about the recent developments with the Kansas Jayhawks, notice of allegations from the NCAA. What other schools do you think are going to have this happen to them as well? When we talk about the notice of allegations, Jeff?
I mean, every one of them that's been involved. You can go down the line. Arizona, I think, will be a little bit of a ways away here. LSU will be a ways away. I could see Auburn, a Creighton, a Louisville, a USC.
Is all Adidas?
No, they're not. They're not. And that's kind of the crazy part. Louisville's Adidas, Auburn, Under Armour. A lot of the other schools were really embroiled because of Christian Dawkins. Remember the runner for Andy Miller. that was kind of, he was on the wiretap, and that's how the FBI got a lot of this information, was through the wiretap of Christian Dawkins.
Wow. So what is in it for these companies? Why do they spend so much time, effort, and resources in doing these things, cultivating these young men and focusing on college basketball in the way they do?
Well, just look at how much money Michael Jordan makes, right? Off his sneakers, and LeBron, Kobe. If you hit one of those guys, it's worth it for all the other guys you're paying minimal money to.
So that's what we're talking about, getting the individual players, Kevin Durant in the NBA. That's the end game here.
Well, that's where they're making their big money. And obviously with schools, you can make some money with certain schools, obviously. The Kentuckys, Kansas for Adidas makes money, but most of the schools aren't making any money. I mean, again, how much money even is a Maryland making for Under Armour? Really the end game for an Under Armour is to get that guy, get the Steph Curry,
right?
Get that elite player who can sell shoes, and there aren't that many of them. But look at Zion. I mean, Zion's a freak of nature. Like, he's going to sell more shoes than anybody, maybe even including LeBron at the end of the day. We'll see here. But again, because of how he plays the game, and every kid looking at Zion and the freakish athleticism, that if he stays healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if Zion Williamson sells more shoes than LeBron James.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And when you hear that Zion Williamson could indeed be involved, in particular in this Kansas case, lay that out a little bit. Zion Williamson's involvement.
Well, really not his,
or a representative of Zion Williams' family.
Yeah, more such that the coaches that were recruiting him, Curtis Townsend at Kansas, with a text message involving Zion going to an Adidas rep. And that was the thing. Remember, Zion played on the Adidas circuit. His father, his godfather, again, ran a team and was paid for by Adidas.
Not a coincidence.
No, of course not.
Godfather ran a team. Okay.
One thing Adidas did right, at least they
right.
bankrolled Zion's godfather and gave him some money to run a team. But ultimately, did it work? Because Adidas didn't end up signing Zion. Nike's got bigger pockets, deeper pockets, and Adidas can't compete. Nobody can. If Nike wants somebody, they're going to get them. I mean, I know Puma got a couple guys from a year ago's draft, top picks, but those were guys like Marvin Bagley that really aren't going to sell shoes. So Nike doesn't care about that. But they're going to make an investment at the lower level to make sure that they've got an in with all these kids coming up, the Imani Bateses, whoever, just in case they become Zion Williamson. And even with Zion, again, they didn't even need to invest it with him at the AAU level. They still got him.
Let's talk about Bill Self. I know you know Bill Self well, but what do you think is going to play out with him personally? And what about the prospect of him going to the NBA?
Well, I thought that for years. I really did. And I thought, like last year, if there were an opportunity, and there wasn't. I mean, that's the thing, is everybody talks, well, Bill Self, go to the NBA. There's got to be an opportunity, and the one that everybody kind of speculates on is the Spurs. He's really tight. I think he roomed with R.C. Buford of the Spurs. And when Popovich retires, everybody thinks it's just a given that Bill Self is going to be the next coach of the Spurs. That's not the case. And I don't know how much longer Pop's going to go anyway. So what's the opportunity for Bill Self? And I think he wants to see this thing through and not run from it until he sees, again, what the penalties are. Then they're going to end up appealing it. I mean, listen, the penalties are going to be significant, but how significant? Are they going to be significant enough that Kansas says we can't stick by you anymore? And in order for that to be the case, I think it's got to be something like, a year, at a minimum of a year suspension, and the fact that he can't recruit for a year, and make it almost impossible for him to be able to coach and the program to be able to survive. I don't think any of these programs are going to get a postseason ban. I really don't. I'd be shocked.
Wow.
I don't.
Wow.
They're going to hit hard. I think they're going to hit hard, and them hitting hard will be like a year-long suspension for multiple coaches at the end of the day. All these other things that really don't matter. There's only really two things that matter. And the number one is obviously a postseason ban. That's the biggest thing that can destroy a program, because then it affects recruiting. you're not going to get kids if you have a postseason ban because kids want to play in the NCAA tournament. Number two is a lengthy suspension to a head coach. And again, I think if you give a guy, 15 or 20 games, I think most schools, whether it's in Arizona, Kansas, an LSU, whoever, they're going to say, all right, we'll appeal that, try to get it down, and we'll live by it. And ultimately, none of this is going to happen for this year. It's all going to happen, in my opinion, after this season ends. And I wonder if they did this on purpose, the timing wise. I think you're going to get through the NCAA tournament, and then you're going to have a bunch of these come down where you're going to have the actual penalties, and then they'll appeal them, and it'll take more months. But I think they did it in a way that it's not going to severely impact the NCAA tournament with a bunch of news that's going to come out. Kansas, all of a sudden you have their sanctions in the middle of the NCAA tournament or right before. I'd be shocked if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're talking about is the NCAA wants to reassert its authority to a certain extent, at least as a storefront to the public, right?
They got to look tough.
Right. And then you want to make sure you don't lose the shoe and apparel companies. No. So what you're going to do is you're going to go after individuals who are expendable per se, compared to the institutions, of course, Bill Self, the coaches, whoever they are, those individuals, the people from Adidas, but not the companies, not the corporations. So eventually we're just going to get back to the status quo, right? That's essentially what we're talking about. Do you foresee that? No changes ultimately in the system?
Well, I think the only changes that are going to happen within the system are if the NCAA starts allowing these kids to get some sort of compensation, whether it's, off their likeness, their name and likeness or whatnot. I think you'll see a little bit of a change that way. But honestly, I still see, even if you're allowing these kids to get something, what's going to happen? What do people always want? You want more, right? No matter what you get, people are going to want more. So it's not going to clean up college basketball. There's going to be corruption. There's going to be people around these kids that are out to make money off them and not out for their best interest. There are going to be coaches to do the same.
Here's the thing. People complain about people like LeVar Ball, but the system creates LeVar Ball. For everybody that's screaming about it, we should be screaming about the system. And I think it's the greatest dilemma in sports that we have in our time, college athletics and compensating athletes.
Yeah. What do you do? I mean, what do you do? If you allow it to be where you can get whatever you want, what is the difference really between the NBA and college?
And we don't need the NCAA. And the NCAA has already lost all of its authority in football. It truly is an empty storefront. I mean, it's just a pretense for the football schools not to pay players, not to pay workers' comp. But at least is there a difference here, Jeff, in terms of how much authority the NCAA can assert? Because the NCAA seems a lot more aggressive. Maybe it's just me. And I know the FBI is the reason, kind of the pretense for this. But do you think that the NCAA purposefully exerts more authority over basketball than football?
Well, because they have the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So, and these schools aren't, and I think it's for both football and basketball. I do see a day when they split off from the NCAA and the NCAA is no more. But the hard part for that is getting everybody unified to be able.
Well, but then the whole amateur thing goes out the window. That's the pretense for amateurism is the NCAA.
Yep. But a lot of people, a lot of the high major coaches are saying, hey, we should split off and do our own tournament. They don't even want the mids and the lows in the NCAA tournament anymore. And I think that's a bad idea because I still feel like the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
That is the NCAA tournament when it comes to the lottery, when it comes to the pools, right?
I don't want to watch a first
brackets
with a bunch of high majors playing high majors. I have no desire. I want to see Wofford, and I want to see some of these schools that can pull big upsets, and everybody does. That's what the general fan does. So yeah, I think again, I think it was set up here for them to be able to have more authority right now because, again, they had all this information at their disposal from the FBI investigation. They didn't do any of it.
Of course. They never do.
It fell into their lap. I mean, it completely fell, and it fell into the FBI's lap as well for the most part because you had a smoking gun, a guy that financial guy out of Pittsburgh that just wanted to throw everybody under the bus so he could get a lighter sentence. That's
what always happens, and he's going to sing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the whatever the weakest link may be in the situation. Jeff, man, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Got to do it again. I'm going to talk more stuff because I know you really have an amazing eclectic interest in other things, right? When I listen to your podcast, tell us about, first of all, what's your podcast? Where can we get it?
Yeah, Good and Plenty podcast. It's a little bit of one
everything.
Day a week college, 1 day a week NBA. So it's kind of I brought on some AAU coach, a top player, high school player. So it's kind of one of those where it gives you a variety of people from across the basketball landscape. The head of the NCAA, Dan Gavitt, who runs the tournament. JD Collins, who's the head of officiating. So kind of in the off season, I've gone that route, and now we'll get back to more talking games and ball, and certainly some of the notice of allegations that are coming out. So Tom Izzo will be my next guest on the pod, and we'll get it going now that NBA is around the corner. How about this? A week from it's this Monday. I got a big dilemma. So it's Rosh Hashanah, Jewish holiday. And NBA media days, all of them are Monday. Like, what do you do?
That's why I roll my eyes. That's why I roll my. So that's set in stone, right?
Isn't Adam Silver Jewish? Last I checked.
Yeah, right.
Come on, man. Like, what are we doing here? You're making me make a tough decision, and right. I'm not the most religious person in the world, but it's still one of those decisions where you don't want to piss off the rest of your family by.
Do you know that you should, if you don't know about the story, Google Sandy Koufax in the World Series?
Oh, I remember it.
But you're not old enough. You weren't alive then, were you?
You were hearing about it. I was not alive.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Well, we got to revisit. We got to bring it back. So it's Good and Plenty, though, is the name of the podcast. Jeff Goodman.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
I really appreciate it so much. That's Jeff Goodman of Stadium, Good and Plenty podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast. Talking basketball. I told you the guy was great. Broke it all down, translated it. It might as well be in a foreign language, this NCAA stuff. But it's all agendized. It's all about money. It's all about maintaining the status quo for the institutions. That's the key. And the very richest and most powerful people at the top of those institutions. So even though Bill Self, rich and powerful guy, if they have to throw him under the bus, Kansas certainly will, to maintain that $200 million relationship with Adidas and what NCAA membership in the Final Four and March Madness means to Kansas Jayhawks program. Now we're going to go out to Dallas, and we're going to talk Cowboys. We're going to talk college football. We're going to talk barbecue. We're going to talk boxing. Hopefully we have enough time. But a stalwart, a titan on Twitter, as far as I'm concerned, Clarence Hill Jr. is joining us you're in Dallas today, right, Clarence?
Well, we call it Fort Worth over here.
Oh, you're in Fort Worth. Oh, slap me.
The better part of the Metroplex down here. I'm with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, so we prefer Fort Worth or Funky Town.
Now, how long have you been covering the Cowboys for the Star-Telegram?
I've been covering the Cowboys since 1997, so that means I've missed the dynasty teams, and I got the retirements of Troy, Emmett, Michael. I got the Quincy Carter years and the T.O. years and the Romo Costa years, and now I got Dak, Zeke, and Amari.
Oh, man, the Romo Coaster years. I love that. That's a great one. Was that like a common nick? Was that out there, Romo Coaster, or did you coin
Yeah,
that?
well, it depends on which side of the coaster you were on, because it went up and down and up and down. And there was Romo Momentum and Romo Sapiens and Romo Coaster. Get it all.
Well, now are you thinking, though, that finally the time has come and that we're starting to approach maybe another golden age of the Cowboys?
Well, I always say it's not my job to project. I can only go by what you've done. And all I've seen was abject failure, mediocrity, and unfulfilled expectations from this Cowboys team since I've been covering the team. But it's also true that this may be the most complete team they've had since 1997.
What's the difference in terms of how they got here compared to where they've been? Why all of a sudden now is the team? Or maybe it's not all of a sudden, it's a progressive.
I mean, it's been going on since 1995, so it's not all of a sudden.
Right,
but,
right.
They've drafted well. The offensive line, they kind of done that throwback thing. And when Jason came in, he wanted to build a line like they had the line in the 90s. That was the foundation of those Super Bowl teams. But, Zeke, getting the quarterback right, They finally have a defense that's complementary to the offense and they have good players on defense. But this year's team is deeper than it's been in the past. And they're deep on the offensive line, they're deep on the defensive line, they're deep in the secondary, and they do have those stars that are playing well.
When you talk about personnel, though, and building this team, there have always been holes. But right now, you hear a lot of people talk about the Cowboys as having as talented a top-to-bottom roster as there is in the NFL. And my question to you is, what about the people behind assembling that roster? Has that changed? And more specifically, has Jerry Jones had his fingers in the pie and taken them out finally, or is he still involved?
Jerry's always been involved, but he's also always listened to the people he's hired. And the difference here is that Will McClay has taken over as the scouting director. And ever since Will McClay has been in charge of the scouting department, now Jerry's the GM and Stephen Jones is the vice president of personnel. This is a family business. If your name is Jones, you're going to always be at the top of the mantle and you're going to have those positions. But Will McClay is the pseudo GM, so to speak. He's in charge of the scouting department. He has really helped stabilize their choosing of players, whether it's in the draft or in free agency. And he's done a great job of just taking the best players and loading this team up with quality draft picks. I mean, it's one thing to pick offensive linemen in the first round. It's one thing to pick Zeke in the first round, but to get guys like Dak in the fourth round, that's made a big difference for this team.
Visiting with Clarence Hill Jr. of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, long-time Dallas Cowboys beat writer. And I don't know how big this is, but it was big in the preseason until Zeke got signed, seemingly. But what about Dak and Amari's contract situation? Could this crop up during the season?
Crop up in good or crop up in bad? I mean, Dak and Amari are not letting it bother them. They're 3-0 and playing the best football of their careers, and they certainly have a great chemistry. Amari described it like a hamburger with ketchup on. I don't know if you like ketchup on your hamburger, but he said they go together like hamburger.
I'm a mustard guy. I'm a mustard and onion guy. So, all right, what are you, by the way?
What's true is that they're not letting the negotiations bother them, and they're not stopping negotiation during the season. It has not been a distraction. And Jerry Jones said before the season or right after the season opener that the deal with Dak could be imminent. Well, what does imminent mean to you? Because it's been 3 weeks later and nothing's done. And I understand that they're it's actually stalled because Dak is going for it all on the field and going for it all off the field. He's not trying to take less. And I said that last year when he had his agent coming out of college was a 4th round pick, was a small town guy out of Shreveport, with no major clients. He made the move before last season to CAA in Todd France. You don't go from a small town guy to CAA to take a team friendly deal to take less money. They're trying to go get it all.
So
and deservedly so.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the deal that Jared Goff got, and you look at, I think Jared Goff's a system quarterback. Some people might argue that Dak is to an extent, but it looks like as the season goes along, more and more so, he's his own man on the field. I mean, do you think he could really break the bank or is Jerry going to try to get him signed before that happens?
They're going to try to get him signed, but he's trying to break the bank. And what's the bank? I mean, the bank this is the NFL. The numbers always go up.
40 million?
Whatever he gets, Patrick Mahomes is going to get more. Deshaun Watson is going to get more. You're just going to break the bank for right now. I mean, Russell Wilson is getting $35 million a year. I think that's the goal, at least the goal right now. And certainly that, whatever you get over that is approaches $40 million.
Isn't it, or could it be problematic if they sign Dak during the season, let's say week 10, week 11? Now you got an Amari Cooper, and you remember last year, now Amari Cooper might have a heck of a lot more leverage being in season. Dak signed, Zeke signed, but we remember what happened last year, right? So now would that give undue leverage to Cooper?
Cooper already has pretty good leverage. I mean, unlike Dak and Zeke who are on rookie deals, Cooper's in the final year of his rookie deal. He's already making $14 million. It's not like Dak's making million, and they were trying to. Cooper's paid. He's getting paid right now, and what the receivers are getting in New Orleans and Atlanta is only up to market.
Visiting with Clarence Hill. Go ahead, Clarence.
Is going to be great, and the Cowboys have already offered him $17 million. I don't know if it's the connection is breaking down or what, but I hear you talking about. I got some yellow screen that says attempting to reconnect, but I guess we're good. But I think that Cooper's going to be good. You know, he's just his personality, but
Right.
in every play on the field, but there doesn't seem.
So I think our connection is breaking up a little bit. I don't know what the story is on that, if it's the Wi-Fi or where we're at on that, Clarence. Talk a little bit more for us. See if we still got you. We still have you. We want to refresh that, Cam. You want to work on that connection with Clarence. And I was just about to ask him because he's talking about the Saints and a little bit reference them, invoke them, if you will. Talk to him a little bit about the game coming up with the Cowboys and the Saints. And, of course, Sean Payton getting the extension with the New Orleans Saints, the 5-year contract extension that was broken by Jay Glazer of Fox Sports recently. I want to ask him about that in relation to the Cowboys because there'd been a lot of talk over the years of Sean Payton as possibly a coach of the Cowboys. And if you guys need me to refresh, Cam, our producer Cam Smith in Boston, if you need me to refresh, I will, to clear our screen here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We do this every Monday through Friday at noon Eastern time, and we've been talking to Clarence Hill Jr. of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He's been covering the Cowboys since 1997, giving us some amazing insight already. Want to talk to him more about the Cowboys if we get the opportunity, and then talk some football potentially with him on the college side with Texas. I know he has interest in their local teams. SMU and TCU just played, and SMU suddenly looks like an emerging program. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to Clarence Hill Jr. here in a second about that. Also coming up, we're going to talk to Tony Basilio, longtime talk show host in Knoxville, voice of the common fan, as he calls himself. But he's been in Knoxville for a long time, and he's the guy on Twitter that you always look at, you always turn to after the games. I link his Twitter feed live sometimes, especially when Tennessee has kind of a problematic game. It's a little bit fun to get your popcorn out and bring up that the show from Knoxville, because Tony is, hopefully we'll find out on the show here coming up later on in the next hour. I want to talk to him about Tennessee football, what we reported yesterday, Peyton Manning being involved and I think we got you back. How you doing, Clarence? Hanging in there. I don't know if our connection is going to work. God.
Like,
yeah, I can hear you, and it's weird because we had you earlier, and it's I guess the Wi-Fi is just in and out at the mercy of our Wi-Fi service today. So let's work on Clarence. I definitely want to see if we can get him back, if we can get him in a better spot Wi-Fi wise, wherever he may be. We're going to work on that. And as you heard, we talked to Jeff Goodman about those NCAA violation allegations against the Kansas basketball program. And, it's amazing as you talk about that situation, and it's like a road to nowhere, right? Because at the end of the day, it's much ado, and it always has been in college sports. And that's why I think one of the landmark things that we've been talking about on this show, SB 206, the original law that will allow for college athletes to get paid to take advantage of their likeness and name from a financial standpoint, that could really be, I think, a game changer in the context of all of this stuff, right? Because we labeled the things that are going on with Adidas. Now, do we still have Clarence with us? Clarence, are you with me? I'm hoping we can get him back, because I really want to talk to him about the Cowboys and the Saints, particularly coaching situation with the Cowboys and other stuff, if we can get him back. Should I refresh, guys? Just let me know, and we'll work on this. Let me see, and I'll check I think we do have him with me. but I think we're kind of at the mercy of the Wi-Fi here.
Here, I've been listening to you the whole time.
I know you can hear my commentary. Well, Brooks is talking about this. I'm going to address it. I know he can hear me, but we can't hear him, unfortunately, right now. So, but we'll get that squared away. And if Clarence doesn't rejoin us, we're going to be bringing him back. I'll guarantee you. Because at the very least, we got to have a barbecue shootout between myself and Clarence. I'm from Kansas City. I'm Mr. Barbecue. Barbecue sauce flows like wine in Kansas City. It flows in my veins. And so let's try one more time to get Clarence. We're going to try one more time here and get him up. We got plenty of time here before we bring Tony on to talk Tennessee football. We got to go back down to deep in the heart of Texas. Any luck, Clarence?
I'm here. I've been listening to you the whole time. On. Got 5 bars, and I'm ready to fight over barbecue.
Right, I know. Well, we're gonna get to that in 1 second. Well, I want to know what we're gonna get to that. I got a question or two for you about it. We could debate that, but I want to know about the Saints game and the Cowboys. But I first want to ask you. It's funny when Jay Glazer announced that Sean Payton gets the 5-year extension. I didn't hear a lot. Now I've heard the rumors about Payton and the Cowboys for years and years, right? But of course, Lincoln Riley comes into the mix now. But all of a sudden, I think Jerry Jones addressed it or talked about Sean Payton in the context of the Cowboys and that extension that maybe put the rumors to rest. What's the story on that?
Yeah, the game. Somebody asked him about the extension, and I asked him. I was here when Payton was here. Of course, I've been here for all of them. But I was here when Payton was here, and I know they have a great relationship. And, you know, they hang out together in Indianapolis at the Combine, and they drink and everything else. And certainly that things about it, and he started laughing about the rumors and said, you know, basically, you know, y'all get me into about Peyton, what type of guy.
Well, I think you can still hear me too, Clarence, can't you? But we're having trouble hearing you on this end for some reason. I don't know why.
That's been a rumor that's been going on. If things didn't work out.
Well, what do you think, Cam? Can we hear Clarence on his end? Because I'm having trouble hearing him, unfortunately. I know he can hear me.
Wi-Fi is strong, and I can hear you.
Unfortunately, we can't hear him, and we don't want to hear me too much. That's for sure. So, well, let me ask you about the Saints and the Cowboys then before because I'd like to at least get your thoughts on that, Clarence. What about the ball game coming up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Obviously, it's a big game. You know, 3-0. They're trying to go 4-0 for the first time since 2007, and certainly the Saints, even though they don't have Drew Brees, they're a worthy opponent, and certainly a team that's looking for payback from last year when they came here and the Cowboys beat them at AT&T Stadium. The Cowboys have a lot of respect for Sean Payton and a lot of respect for Kamara, and they know the Saints fans will be ready. That's a tough test for the Cowboys. Again, this is the Cowboys team to play the Giants, the Redskins, and the Dolphins. Most people say they haven't played anybody. Well, go win in New Orleans. You know, and that's the goal. This is a test for them. Go win in New Orleans.
Now, I want to, you know, I'm not skipping over the Cowboys here. We talked about the Cowboys, but now I want to talk a little bit about barbecue. I know you're a barbecue guy. And, you know, I heard you on a radio show, Clarence, when you're in Oxnard, and you were talking about barbecue there, and that's when the light went on. Because I'm Mr. Barbecue in Kansas City. But I want to ask you, first of all, you define Texas barbecue. It's brisket.
It's brisket. It's brisket. Now, I want to let you know one thing, okay? My first job out of college was in Kansas City. Okay, I worked at Kansas City Star, okay? So right. I know Kansas City
I'm
barbecue.
A Gates guy, by the way.
Novice Kansas City barbecue. Okay, I'm a Gates guy. I'm Arthur Brown's guy. I used to always say, you get you some Arthur Brown. So, but I used to eat Gates once a week because I love the hot man.
By the way, that's perfect.
I love the experience.
Yes, it's totally, and I think it's kind of a window into. it's kind of like a window into somebody's personality in that town. If you're a Gates person or a Jack Stack person or a Bryant,
Right.
but I'm with you because Bryant's has the Carolina sauce. I'm not really into that, the vinegar based stuff. Whereas Gates has a unique sauce, right? It's just that's what pumps through my veins. Right. Gates sauce. You hit the nail. You nailed that. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna get Bryant's meat. Not that, but I always order the Gates meat with no fat. Now I know there's going to be fat on it, but it'll get a little gristly if you don't say that again. Man, I wish we could get Clarence here. We got to bring him back.
You want something because
yes,
lean is drier. Lean is drier. I hope you can hear me because I got one thing to say. The difference between Kansas.
I can hear you.
Number one, as I left, everybody's talking about Oklahoma Joe's. Okay, when you got to talk about Oklahoma Joe's, it's not Kansas City barbecue. Okay, you got to put Oklahoma on the name. Don't talk to me about the Oklahoma Joe's in Kansas City. It's not Kansas City barbecue. Of course,
agree.
You had to change the name to Joe's. Okay, don't talk. And secondly, when you got to talk about the sauce, it's not about the meat. In Texas, we don't talk about sauce. We talk about the meat because the meat is where it's at. In Kansas City, you're talking about the sauce. You're talking about the beans.
The sides.
No, that's barbecue is about the meat.
Right. Yeah.
The meat.
Now, Texas actually is a situation. Now, by the way, don't tell anybody, but I love Stubbs sauce. Even though it's not a kid. I'm a Stubbs person. What do you think of Stubbs?
I like Stubbs. I mean, Texas has, it's not about you go Austin, Dallas. I mean, they have great barbecue places all over. There's so many different barbecue capitals of Texas, from Lockhart to Luling to Lexington. I grew up in a small town. Every small town has their own city market where they make their own sausages, and it's all different. That's just a special thing about it because every small town in Texas, they have a city market. They make their own sausage. Okay. And so you have homemade sausages and all that other stuff. That's what makes it great. But I love Stubbs. I grew up, I went to school in Austin. Obviously, I love Stubbs. But now you got Franklin's and you got all the new spots that open up with all these so-called pit masters. That's the thing about it. Everybody has it's a new pit master. It's like a cottage industry now.
It's like
everybody's a pit master.
It's a science now, right? Literally.
Oh, yeah. It's barbecuology. It's barbecuology down here. And so, there's in Dallas, you have several different places, go-to places, that you can hit it up. And certainly you Stubbs in Austin, and Austin is the center
it
of
certainly
it all.
is. And as a Kansas City guy, I don't tell anybody. We're just going to keep that under our hats here that I actually like Stubbs sauce. And that's kind of a Kansas City-esque sauce, red sauce, tomato-based. But so I want to ask you, now, you mentioned SMU on your timeline, and they're kind of creeping on people now with the TCU game. But talk a little bit about that SMU program. I mean, this is not without the realm of possibility that they could be making a leap up to maybe not at a high level SBS, but this talk about that program.
For SMU, they've been down for so long, and they're finally embracing Dallas.
We lost Clarence.
If you saw that game,
unfortunately, we're
Dallas,
top of the hour. Why don't we? We're going to touch base with Clarence. Give it a shot with him, Cam. We're going to bring him back, obviously, but I want to talk some football. And man, I want to talk about the fight. We just have to get a good connection. And you know what, man? See, that's the great thing about the studio that we have here. We have such an unbelievable connection. Thanks to Ryan Abraham at USCFootball.com. We're in his studios in Redondo Beach. A great place to do the show from. And so we really appreciate that. But sometimes we're at the mercy of Wi-Fi. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes it's perfect. And unfortunately, we can't get Clarence today at the end of the show. But Cam, let's we're definitely let Clarence know we want him back. And I actually want to talk more barbecue with him. We just didn't have a chance to get down the road as far as we would have liked with him. And we're going to be talking a little bit about boxing, I think, before the end of the week, because we've got the Spence fight coming up, Errol Spence against Sean Porter. I don't think it's a great fight necessarily, but a lot of people are hyping it up. It's here in Los Angeles at Staples Center on Saturday. Errol Spence against Sean Porter. You'll be hearing about it. If you watch television, it's being promoted, hyped. And so we're going to have some guests on, I think, Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, before the end of the week to talk Spence Porter. And it's been unanimous so far. Everybody thinks that Porter's not going to win that fight. And I'm in agreement. So I think Spence is going to win that fight. Unanimous decision, or maybe a KO. But so far we've talked about these NCAA violations. We've talked NFL with Clarence Hill, some barbecue as well. And Florida State, I broke that news for you earlier today. If you haven't heard, if you're just tuning in. And coming up, by the way, we'll have Tony Basilio of Tennessee. Tony Basilio is coming up. If you're a Tennessee fan, you want to hear that. I would imagine you would, because we broke news yesterday about Peyton Manning being involved in a coaching search at Tennessee right now. Yes, there is a coaching search. It's a contingency plan. But I don't want to go down that road right now. I want to get back to what I was talking about before. We were just talking about Florida State. And I mentioned earlier in the show, if you missed it, Deion Sanders is the guy who was behind the Willie Taggart hire, probably the most influential person involved in that hire. It's amazing. Back-to-back days, we're talking about big sports celebrities, NFL Hall of Famers. You know, when you think back to Deion Sanders, there was no bigger college football player when he played. He played right around the same time as Bo Jackson. And what's interesting about Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, they both play baseball, remember? Great baseball players, and they played college football right around the same time. And it's interesting when you look at baseball in general and the amount of African Americans. Since Deion Sanders and Bo Jackson, as you trace the participation of African Americans in Major League Baseball, the percentage of participation at the Major League level have gone down almost to the levels of where they were when Jackie Robinson retired, which is pretty astonishing. But that decline, actually the peak of African-American participation in Major League Baseball hit right around when Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders were playing baseball along with football. Very, very high-profile athletes, and many of you watching this right now, I'm sure remember the Bo Jackson run in the Kingdome in Seattle, and Deion Sanders down the sidelines after making an interception for the Cowboys or the Falcons. And, of course, Sanders playing for the Braves and the Yankees and Bo Jackson for the Royals. But since then, there's certainly been a significant ebb in Major League Baseball in terms of African-American players to the point where we're now back down at levels where we're approaching where they were in the late 50s, which is tragic, really, in a sense. As we continue to celebrate, thankfully, Jackie Robinson and his legacy with the number 42 being retired across the league. I'd like to see Roberto Clemente have his number retired as well across Major League Baseball. But so we were discussing Deion Sanders, and I was looking at the website sportsbetting.ag, and they have some candidates for that Florida State job right now in the event that Willie Taggart is jettisoned from that role. And some of the candidates include Dino Babers of Syracuse, Mike Gundy of Oklahoma State, Dave Clawson of Wake Forest, Matt Campbell of Iowa State, Urban Meyer, Josh Heupel of UCF, and Scott Frost of Nebraska. And the leading contender for the job at Florida State would be Dino Babers. I'm not saying that Babers wouldn't be interested. He might be. I think that's a better job potentially than Syracuse. A lot of the reason behind that would be the favorable recruiting ground geographically that I discussed earlier. But I can tell you that guys like Mike Gundy, there's less. I mean, I have a better chance of being coach at Florida State than Mike Gundy. Absolutely no chance. I think this is just a random list. I think that's where everyone is operating out of it, unless you really watch this show. We're the one show out there every single day, Monday through Friday, noon Eastern time, who can tell Florida State fans, can tell Tennessee fans, can tell USC, Auburn fans what's actually happening behind the scenes. We've told you Deion Sanders is involved in that Florida State coaching search right now, though his influence justifiably may be on the wane. But Florida State make no mistake, when you talk about Tennessee, Tennessee's in trouble, big trouble. But right now, the stadium is still relatively full. And, here's the thing with Jeremy Pruitt. Jeremy Pruitt last season had a losing record. Yet, for some reason, he has been a favorite among media members. A lot of apologists out there for Jeremy Pruitt. That's just a fact. And I heard people saying in the media, mainstream sports media, after Tennessee upset Kentucky 24-7 last season, late in the year, that he was a candidate for Coach of the Year. And of course, the next week, Tennessee was destroyed by Vanderbilt. So I think when you talk about Jeremy Pruitt, the media has looked upon him rather favorably. And even in the context of, let's say, Jim Harbaugh right now, I mean, you watch somebody like Paul Feinbaum on ESPN who's just carpet bombing Jim Harbaugh like it's Armageddon in Ann Arbor, which I think it is. Knowing some Michigan alums as I know them, it kind of comes off that way. But they've got a full stadium in Michigan still, and they've got a relatively full stadium. It's not perfect in Tennessee. It's not the way it has been, but under the circumstances. And I think that in the case of Tennessee, the success in the fan support, the specifically the fan support, is related to the fact that the media has been in full-throated support of Jeremy Pruitt coming into this year, even after the Vanderbilt loss. And now you have what is arguably the worst loss in Tennessee football history against Georgia State. And I know we're only on year 2, but you're talking about Georgia and Alabama being on the schedule, Mississippi State coming up. That's not an easy nut to crack. And it's going to be a disastrous year, record-wise, it appears, for Tennessee as the season goes along. Yet, unless you're watching this show or you're reading Pete Thamel of Yahoo Sports, who went scorched earth. He went scorched earth on Phil Fulmer, the athletic director at Tennessee. Unless you're following us, you would never know that a possibility is out there that Pruitt may well be replaced. And I'm not saying during the season. That's what Pete is hinting and indicating. But, I'm indicating that there's a search going on as a contingency plan for possible candidates. And when I say that, I'm saying, and I want to be specific, and I really haven't mentioned this, but this is not, Peyton Manning jumping on his iPad or his laptop and doing research on candidates. This is Peyton Manning being involved in contacting or being involved in that contact of potential coaching candidates, representatives. Now, you're not going to have a coach involved in those discussions. You're going to have their representatives. You're going to have third parties. And Manning has been involved in that. And he's been involved in that in the context of the Tennessee athletic department. Phil Fulmer is very well aware of what Peyton Manning is doing in the context of a coaching search. Of course, Pete Thamel of Yahoo Sports, as I mentioned earlier in the show, is saying he thinks Phil Fulmer is going to take over as interim. So that may be the situation. And to be quite honest, when you realize what's gone on and see what's happening with the program right now, the coaching staff, the decisions, the hires that were made on the staff of Tennessee, the performance against Florida. Tennessee is a bottom dweller. They are a bottom feeder. And when I say that, this is not a fluke. They are legitimately also ran in the SEC and the SEC East. Florida made the decision before the game last Saturday to rest a couple of their players who had been nicked up, had been banged up, with the indication being they didn't think that Tennessee was much of a threat. And of course, that turned out to be true. Now, Florida, by no means, is an elite team in the SEC. They're one or two tiers down from the Georgias and the Alabamas and the LSUs, and maybe even below an Auburn. And then you have perhaps a Florida a Mississippi State. Who knows? We're still kind of waiting to see on Florida. We've got to see a game against Georgia. We've got to see them play better competition. We haven't seen it yet with Tennessee, but Tennessee is rapidly, falling off that cliff into the nadir, if you will. And when you talk about a Vanderbilt, which was blown out by LSU last Saturday, Vanderbilt blew out Tennessee. It was non-competitive at the end of last year. It's part of that rivalry game. So you've got major problems if you're Tennessee, and you still got to play Kentucky. You still got to play Vanderbilt. You still got a game at Missouri. You still got home games against South Carolina, Mississippi State. You've got a road game at Alabama, home game against Georgia, and then a home game against UAB. And anybody who thinks that UAB game is going to be an automatic W for Tennessee needs to have a reality check after the Georgia State game. And after losing that game at home, the BYU game, some really poor coaching decisions that were made in that game by Jeremy Pruitt led to the BYU win. And of course, that was an overtime victory for BYU, which was dispatched last week by Washington, but does have a nice win over USC in Provo. So, but it does make sense that Phil Fulmer might come in on an interim basis, stabilize the program, and then they go forward with a new coach next season. I want to hear what Tony Basilio has, and we're going to talk to him in a second. Knoxville show host. I want to pull up his bio on the show so I can let you guys know what it is. But he does a show on 99.7 FM and 1040 AM in Knoxville from 11 to 1 o'clock. And so he's going to join us as he gets off the air, which he's just getting off the air now. But he's got a great show in that after Tennessee football games, I like to link his video feed of his show because he really he taps into the veins. That orange blood flows from a guy like Tony Basilio. So we're going to talk to him in a second and get his thoughts about everything that we're talking about, because Tennessee is a blue blood program as far as I'm concerned. They're just facing major headwinds, and what's making it all the more fascinating is Peyton Manning's his involvement. And when I say seeming involvement or reported involvement, that's not what it is. It's involvement. I know for a fact. And this isn't the first time that Peyton Manning has been involved in coaching searches. Of course, they've had a litany of poor coaches that have come and gone. When you talk about a Derek Dooley, you talk about a Butch Jones, this is nothing new. And so I think at the end of the day, when the smoke clears, you got to wonder if Philip Fulmer is in trouble and if there needs to be a change made there. Because when you look at a succession of poor coaching hires, it starts at the top. It starts with the trustees and the influential donors. I recognize that, but you also have to take into account the athletic director. And at Tennessee, the athletic director wields more influence and power than they do, say, at USC, where they wield virtually no power. When it comes to the USC hire, the athletic director is not going to have much to say, if any. There may be a head coach hired before the AD is hired at USC. So we're just going to have to wait and see when it comes to that. But so we'll get to Tony here in a second. But we were talking about Florida State and that job, the Tennessee job, and they have one thing in common. They aren't nearly as attractive as they once were, or at least what people might perceive them to be, because these jobs are not static. Now, when you look at a USC, that's a very attractive job. Of course, they haven't been an embarrassment in the way that Florida State may end up as an embarrassment, or that Tennessee may end up as an embarrassment as well. But when you look at those two jobs, they've fallen off a cliff in terms of attractiveness. And so when I was reading this list earlier, Josh Heupel, who's at UCF, Florida State's going to be a very tough sell for someone like Josh Heupel. Tennessee, maybe not as much for someone like him. But I can tell you this much. Somebody like Tony Elliott, who right now, and I want to repeat that name, Tony Elliott, and I've said it before in this show, offensive coordinator and recruiting coordinator for Clemson, right? And one of the masterminds behind the Clemson Tigers' success over the years. Tony Elliott is a guy who is going to be looking at a very top-level elite job. And I'm not so sure that Tennessee and Florida State are necessarily in that category. Tennessee is more so for obvious reasons. And then you're also in the SEC. You've got the amount of money that you're going to reap from the SEC network and the upcoming new television contract that will probably be won by Disney ESPN as they go into a barroom brawl for the SEC broadcast rights. CBS may be able to retain those rights, but that means a lot for schools, especially schools that are bottom feeders like a Vanderbilt or a Mississippi State or an Ole Miss when it comes to the revenue that flows from those broadcast rights agreements that allows for better facilities, bigger recruiting budgets. Now, Florida State, is going to reap that to an extent with the ACC, of course, and with the ACC network launching. That comes into play. That's going to help, but not to the extent it'll help at a Tennessee. And Tennessee already has that financial infrastructure built in. So when you talk about these jobs, by no means is someone like a Mike Gundy, who's listed as a possible in the Florida State situation, a given. So the other thing to think about, I think, when you're talking about college football right now, is the changing landscape of, I'm not going to call it player empowerment, but player assertiveness. And as we go along in college football, I think more and more you're going to start to see coaches being held more accountable, and we're starting to see blips of it. I mentioned SB 206, the fact that players in college football and basketball more than likely are going to be in a position to benefit from their likenesses and names here coming up in the future. That law is going to pass in California. It's going to go into effect in 2023, regardless of the NCAA litigation. The problem that the NCAA has in this case is, in the past, when something like that would come up in Congress, the NCAA was able to buy off Congress. But of course, in California, the assembly here in California, our legislature is already spoken for because the unions have already bought off the legislature. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the California Assembly is passing such a law, which I believe will go into effect in 2023. Thus, you see New York, the state of New York, you see the state of North Carolina, you see the state of South Carolina. And I have no doubt all of the southern states will have legislation in place to match what California is doing in terms of the financial benefits that will be reaped by college football and basketball players in the future, if indeed this law goes into effect in 2023. I think that the fact that it's 2019 and this law is starting to happen, and of course it's not going to go into effect till 2023, that's accounting for litigation. It's assumed that the NCAA will sue here. And because the NCAA is essentially fighting for its life because it represents this phony baloney amateurism. And to lose that battle is to lose the reason for the NCAA to exist. Amateurism is all about not paying the players, not paying workers' compensation. And don't forget that even though the schools may protest against the NCAA, in public, you can bet the NCAA is arguably the most important thing in college sports because it maintains the ability not to pay the players. That's why it exists. And it's not a coincidence that it does not have an enforcement mechanism. It does not have people going around the country enforcing the rules. That's not a coincidence. It's in-house compliance. Right? So when you talk about a player's ability to gain financially because of his likeness and his name, and then you also talk about what's happening at the University of Houston right now with that quarterback, De'Aaron King, if you haven't heard about it, we now have a rule in college football. If you play 4 games or less, you can redshirt and maintain your eligibility to play another year. Well, Houston's quarterback, who's a great quarterback, right, has decided to forego the rest of his season with the University of Houston. D'Eriq King, he's healthy and he's played well, but UH on the field is not healthy. They've struggled mightily under new coach Dana Holgorsen. So King has decided that he's going to forego this year and come back next season, it appears, for the University of Houston. All right? Because we have this rule now where 4 games, you can play 4 games and you maintain your eligibility, right? If you want to then redshirt the rest of the season. Now that we have that rule, you're going to see players not only doing what D'Eriq King is doing, who's a quality player, right, and would put up big numbers this year and would be facing an opportunity in the NFL as soon as next year. You're going to see players doing what he's doing, and it appears that Dana Holgorsen, the new coach at Houston, has convinced him to do this, because now you've got a Houston season that's in the tank. You know, they're struggling, obviously. So Holgorsen wants to coach him up for a year, have another season of recruiting, come back next year, and maybe King has a breakout season, if you will, right? But the flip side of that is D'Eriq King's father, Eric King, has told a television station in Houston that he wants his son to leave, or he has counseled his son to leave. So the alternate part of that rule and the unintended part of that rule has been where you play 4 games and then you can decide, all right, I'm not going to play anymore and I'm going to transfer and I'm still going to maintain that eligibility from that year. I didn't burn a year of eligibility, and I can transfer and become immediately eligible, right? That's part of the rule. So now you're enabling players in college sports and college football, particularly, right, to do what's best perhaps for them. And it's almost a try it before you buy it. It cuts both ways. We saw Kelly Bryant at Clemson, lead Clemson out of the gate to an undefeated record, and then decide to transfer once he was replaced at quarterback by Trevor Lawrence. He goes to Missouri, becomes immediately eligible. He played 4 games. Kelly Bryant for Clemson left, went to Missouri. Now he's their starting quarterback. Ask South Carolina about Kelly Bryant, who helped the Tigers defeat South Carolina last Saturday in Columbia. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, with the principle of players getting financial benefits, right? And now players having the ability to move much more freely. And when you say slippery slope, well, folks, we're on it. We're on that slippery slope right now. Times are changing. And I think the biggest thing to happen right now in college sports, the biggest thing is not that initial law that's being passed by the California Assembly that will allow players to benefit from their likeness and their name. That's not the biggest thing that's happening here. What's happening is that other states are going to adopt that law. That's an acknowledgement of really the amorality of the system. How can we not allow for this to happen? And of course, it was prompted, all of this, by the lawsuit that was lodged by Ed O'Bannon, and that was chronicled so well by the documentary director John Weinbach in the film Soul Man. I suggest you seek that out. It's a 30 for 30. SOLE, Soul Man. Google it. That's what really prompted the California Assembly to take up such a principle, such a prospect, create a bill, and then pass it into law, which is happening as we speak, that would allow for players to benefit from their likeness. That's the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit, right? And that's what got it out onto a documentary, out in public. And because Ed O'Bannon won a judgment and sought damages financially in relation to the EA Sports game, the college football game in particular, the NCAA decided to withdraw its participation from those EA Sports games. And that's why we don't have them today. And sadly, Ed O'Bannon has been blamed He's been blamed by sports media pundits for us not having the game. Forget about the fact that athletes aren't compensated who play college football while they play a life-endangering sport. Forget about the fact that they don't have health care in writing. Forget about the fact they can't get a second opinion if they have an injury. It's not like you get hurt a lot in football, right? Forget all that. It's Ed O'Bannon's fault that he was asking for compensation, fair compensation, in that lawsuit. And that's what's prompted this law in California. And now you know what's going to happen. Now EA Sports, those football and basketball games are likely to come back. The football game, at least, is likely to come back, right? And now you're going to be able to play, Ohio State against Oregon in the EA Sports college football game, whatever it is, 2023, I guess, is when it would start, if that's when the California law first goes into effect. You would think that other legislatures beginning to adopt this, maybe we get federal legislation before it's all over. That's also a possibility. We'll have to see. But in the end, what I think is going to end up happening is you're going to have a payment to all college football players, perhaps college football players on scholarship, if you will, or maybe there'd be a set number of players on each roster. But it might be based on the NCAA scholarship limits as to who gets paid if there is another EA Sports type of game, right? If we get something like that, we get flat payments to all the players, much in the way you would get that with, NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA players. Of course, some players, if you're on the cover of the game, you might get more, right? That's the reality of the situation. That's what we're going to be facing now with this likeness rule. I think it's a problematic situation. Some may view this as a half measure or a bridge to prevent full out compensation of college athletes. And if that's the case, I think it's unfortunate if that's the case, because I'd like to see full on compensation, full on medical benefits, to say the least, for these guys. It's only fair. It's ridiculous that I'm even have to advocate for it, right? Instead, though, I think what this law may do in California, it may end up being a half measure where, some guys who are bench players may get a small amount of money, few $100s, who knows, for the EA Sports participation because they're on scholarship, whatever it may be. They fall under that umbrella at their respective school. And then you may get high-profile players getting paid a lot more money. And then, of course, you have sponsorship opportunities for the higher-profile players. Could be from shoe and apparel companies, for all we know, right? Well, that's life. I mean, some guys get more money than other guys. But I think in the case of college football, there should be some sort of compensation model in general, forgetting about sponsorship, forgetting about benefiting off your likeness or name. There should be some basic compensation model that benefits all the players in a more substantive, thorough, and fair way. It's not happening right now. It's not even close to happening, right? So I fear that getting to that, it's going to take a lot longer with this law coming into place with the likeness and the name. And it's all about delay. It's all about obfuscating. It's all about distracting, right? I mean, this is a big deal only because the system is so rotten and unfair that this is a landmark decision. And it's 2019. When you think about commercial spectator sports, college athletics, from a football perspective, makes more money than Major League Baseball and the NBA. ESPN, the existence of ESPN, its financial model is primarily based on college football and college basketball to an extent. But college football, more so than the NFL, drives the bus at ESPN. And it always has. And there's been some recent articles written to that effect. We need to get some of those people on in sports media that cover the sports media that have been writing some of these stories, like Mike McCarthy of Front Office Sports is an example of one. How college football really is now the bread and butter of of ESPN. That's why Fox has gotten into that business. So speaking of college football, we're going to go out to Knoxville and visit with the voice of the common fan, Tony Basilio, 99.7 WJBE in Knoxville. And he's a busy man right now. How you doing, Tony?
Hey, Brooks, longtime admirer of yours, man. Great honor being with you.
Well, I really appreciate it. I don't know if you know, but sometimes I link your show on my timeline after Tennessee games so people can watch you.
Hey,
So, I mean, I've been a fan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, man, it's probably always busy because there's always stuff going on with the Big Orange. But tell us about what the week has been like in the aftermath of that Florida game in Knoxville.
It's just unreal. We keep thinking that it's not going to get worse, and it just keeps getting worse. It's hard to describe how much this impacts this community to be as bad as that football team is. And the silly season's, it's like it's almost cranking up here. It's terrible, really.
What did you think of? Did you get a chance to see the Pete Thamel piece about Fulmer?
Yeah, I thought it was directed by John Curry, because I think Pete and John Curry are pretty close. And I know you're in the margins guy. You like to not only look at what's being said, but why it's being said. I think that's the first of several pieces that are going to be written by national media types. The national media folks really hate that the Tennessee fan base had that revolt on the Schiano hire that offends them. And so that's, I think, the first of many hit type pieces. We both know Philip Fulmer doesn't have many, shall we say, friends in the national media for whatever reason. He didn't even when he coached here. He was treated as the punchline of jokes. Even when he put together a pretty good coaching career, I think he's brought some of that on himself. There's certainly that narrative out there that he stabbed Johnny Majors in the back. I certainly think it's probably somewhat true. I think most Tennessee fans would think he probably shoved him over the ledge. Curry, however, and the way he acquired that power, John Curry, he operated Brooks like he was some kind of double agent spy. He let all those John Gruden rumors proliferate to the point of just silliness.
We're talking about Curry now. We're talking about Curry.
Yeah, I'm talking about Curry, right, because I think the Curry thing ties into that article. I really do. Yeah.
Now explain who John Curry is for people who don't know.
Yeah, he's the former athletic director here. He's the guy that led the worst coaching search in the history of mankind. That whole Schiano Sunday thing was on his watch. What John Curry did is we were able to pull back and do an autopsy on that whole deal. Is he had a guy hired with that was such a weird, questionable hire in Greg Schiano, who at the time was a defensive coordinator at Ohio State. But he had that whole stain of that Sandusky stuff on him, whether it's fair or not. He did, to the point where Oregon wouldn't look at him. Several other jobs, his agent, Jimmy Sexton, tried to get him involved with several other jobs. Well, he talks Tennessee into it. And Sexton has this weird power over Tennessee where he's able to somehow convince them to take a guy who had looked unhireable. And John Curry had his minions in the media out there doing his bidding for him, but he didn't prepare anybody at the university level that, hey, this is what we're going to do. So he became a guy who was able to, Philip Fulmer, let's say if he was wanting to nudge him off the cliff, he was already dangling at the cliff, probably hanging on with one hand, holding on to the ledge, and all you had to do at that point was walk over and step on his fingers. Curry did most of what he did to himself. Pete Thamel makes it sound like Philip Fulmer went in there and knifed him. I don't think anything can be further from the truth. John Curry got himself fired.
Now, let's take us back to the Schiano situation and maybe in the past in general. What's your experience or what's your knowledge, if any, of Peyton Manning's involvement in those coaching situations?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Peyton Manning was in the middle of that Schiano thing. In fact, I know that Peyton Manning thought that it was silly of Tennessee fans to overreact in that way. I think those people were really surprised that Tennessee fans said, no, we don't want this guy here. I think it was a real miscalculation on his part and on the part of a lot of people. Yeah, I think Manning was in the middle of that.
Now, what about the media? Did the media, outside of the people who we're talking about, were supporting Curry, were supporting the idea of Schiano, and Peyton Manning's in that mix? That's a pretty powerful brew there.
Yeah.
Well, then why did the Tennessee fans rebel in the way they did?
I've never seen anything like it, Brooks. I had people tell me, I don't want to watch my football team and think about the Penn State deal and think about what that guy did or didn't know. And hey, look, sports are a refuge for people. Sports are a way we get away from everyday life. If you and I were interested in everyday life, we'd be doing something else other than playing in the fantasy land of sports. And sports are a refuge, and that's the only way I can say it. They just didn't want. I had many people that day tell me, we opened the phones on my deal, and we were on for 11 hours on that Schiano Sunday deal.
Wow.
I had people crying. I was 11 hours sitting in this very spot, and I had people literally openly, and it's up there. It's in my archives at TonyBasilio.com if people want to go back and look at it. It is open weeping. I was in tears, and my heart was breaking for this place because I knew what it was going to mean to this fan base. I read the fan base, the AD, Peyton Manning, the Haslam family. They didn't read it. And by the way, the Haslam family, for those that are uninitiated, they call the shots here. They've always called the shots here. That's the
Cleveland Browns owner too. Cleveland Browns owner,
who's now, this is going to be really interesting about this deal. What we don't know is how much involvement Jimmy Haslam is going to have in this Tennessee experience, this Tennessee program moving forward. And that's going to create a very interesting vacuum if, in fact, this job becomes available again.
What do you think the odds are it does become available, whether it's during the season, after the season? What's your read on it?
I don't think Tennessee could stomach another coaching search unless they're forced to do it, is my answer to that. I think the stain and the pain that came from that last opening, I think most people here would rather hold on to this coach and see him make it. The question becomes, can you hold on to a guy that wins 3 games in this climate? Because I'm looking at their schedule and I'm going, we're having an honest discussion on my show today about it. I had a former player in here, a guy by the name of Jabari Davis, who is unbelievably verbose on Twitter. Like, he just doesn't care. and he's passionate about this place. He's just passionate. And the discussion we're having is, can you hang on to somebody who wins 3 games? I mean, I don't know.
Well, Tony, as I look at this season and you talk about the pain of a search, I think about the pain of a search compared to the pain of what you're about to go through, because you're about to walk through fire. Now, here's the thing for me with this season. You can live with losing to Alabama, getting embarrassed by Georgia. I think you guys can live with that because you kind of expect it, maybe even lose to a Mississippi State. But when you get blown out by Vandy, when you lose to UAB, that's when it gets painful. I mean, and I think that's when it calls into question if y'all can get through that.
And here's the problem, Brooks, the way this schedule's set up, and this has been for several years now. October's a gauntlet. October's so unforgiving. Tennessee took a team a couple years back, the apex of the Butch Jones deal. I think they're 6-0, 5-0, 6-0, going to down to Texas A&M, lose a game, and they don't win another game for like a month and a half. I mean, and that's basically how this thing has worked. And that's why they have a real conundrum with their football team right now, because you have a starting quarterback who's broken in Jared Garantano. He's just lost. He's lost.
What about the coaching staff, though, on that front, the offensive coordinator, and what's happening there?
You know, Jim Chaney is a really excellent, and I do mean excellent, offensive coordinator who's proven. He's got the bona fides, he's got the track record, he has the CV to suggest that he can get them through this. The problem is I've got a quarterback that's literally in the weeds, and then I have a kid we haven't prepared behind them because they didn't count on this.
Maurer.
Yeah, in Maurer. And then they have a kid from California, a kid by the name of Shrout, that they don't like because they think he's a turnover machine. So now you've got a toxic stew here. And I don't know how you get out of it. I don't know if you can coach your way out of it. I think it's like you said, it's like you take your medicine. Here's the thing, you know this. It's one thing for me to say this is going to be a tough and painful year. It's another thing each and every day to get up and live as a fan base, as proud people, to live through that year, especially when you've had 10 years of this. It isn't like, you know, you just take one or two bad years, you take your medicine and you know that you're going to be good on the other side. No, you don't know that. This place is 20 years and counting. This is 21 since their last Southeastern Conference championship. That just doesn't seem possible.
Now, and I've talked about this a lot in the last few days,
Yeah.
but we're really facing a perfect storm here because although Tennessee, you've got Nashville, you got Memphis, you have some fertile recruiting ground there. Right. Tennessee has always made a practice of being able to go into Georgia, go into Alabama, go into some of the neighboring states, and in some time have their way. But now you've got this perfect storm. You've got Kirby, you've got Dabo, you've got Nick. And from what I'm hearing, just from my sourcing on this story, to be honest with you, the attractiveness of the Tennessee job has really fallen off a cliff. I mean,
well,
in terms of,
I think it's true. I think you're right. And in fact, let's think about this for a second, okay? Tennessee in the 90s was Clemson. If you look at Clemson, right. You look at Clemson's recruiting footprint, that is exactly what Tennessee did. The type of athletes they have. It's exact. In fact, it's weird. Okay. Tennessee allowed them to jumpstart their program when Lane Kiffin cut Taj Boyd loose. Taj Boyd was committed, still wanted to come to Tennessee. And there was a coach over there, a struggling coach early in his tenure by the name of Dabo Swinney.
Dabo Swinney, right.
And he gifted him Taj Boyd.
Yeah.
Not only that, here's another backstory for you that maybe a lot of your listeners/viewers don't know. People are not going to believe this when I say this, but it's true. Butch Jones had a kid, a generational quarterback, who's now the quarterback at Clemson, whose father went to East Tennessee State. I know the guy that roomed with him. They grew up. This kid grew up wearing Peyton Manning's number. A Tennessee football family dreaming of playing here. I'm talking about the current quarterback at Clemson. Came on a visit here.
Wow.
His dad, in the middle of the visit, texts his dad, they're ignoring me. They don't include him in the things that they were taking their other serious recruits at that time. Butch Jones, the father goes to Butch Jones and says, what gives? And Butch Jones says, we don't think your son can help us.
Unbelievable.
That's how you do a university like this, and you stay in the weeds as long as you have. You have to have some self-inflicted wounds along the way. And this place is the king of self-inflicted wounds. And this fan base, Brooks, they deserve so much better. I mean, it's heartbreaking for me at how great these fans are here. They deserve so much better.
What's the record going to be at the end of the year? What are you projecting?
Man, I'm trying to get through today.
Go ahead. What do you? I mean,
at best case scenario, 5 wins. Probably 3-9. I'll say win over Vanderbilt, win over Birmingham or Kentucky.
What about the Phil Fulmer coaching thing? Is that a pie in the sky? Is there no chance, or do you think there's any substance? And here's one thing I'll say about that, by the way.
Yeah.
The idea that you're going to bring in Phil Fulmer after you lose to Georgia, Mississippi State, and Alabama is ridiculous, because those are three good. I mean, Mississippi State's a winnable game. The other two we know aren't. Now, if you lose to UAB, that's different. But is that prospect there, in your opinion, at all?
Anytime, I'll say this for Philip Fulmer. I'm going to answer your question. My sources tell me the last couple of games, he has been in coaches' meetings frequently. He has been demanded printouts of the game plan.
Wow, this is amazing.
And
that's amazing.
Well, that's what we're here for. And I'm telling you, this place is the gift. If you're doing what I'm doing, I mean, the amount of material, I can sit here for days with you. He is that involved on a daily basis on what's going on with their football program.
Well, and I will tell you this, in my report about Peyton Manning, I have direct knowledge that Peyton Manning is involved in helping with the contingency plans, coaching candidates and whatnot under the auspices of Phil Fulmer. So what I was going to ask you as well is, what is the current state of Peyton's relationship with Phil?
I don't think they have much of one.
But has there been any problem in the past, or has it been a falling out, or has it been good? Or?
Well, here's what happened. We're back to the John Curry thing, okay? Philip Fulmer openly campaigned for the AD job. This is when they gave the job to John Curry. That would have been the spring of, what year is it? I guess 2017? Because Curry was only here a few months, I believe. At any rate, Peyton Manning went with who the Haslams wanted to hire, which is John Curry instead of his head coach. Philip Fulmer doesn't forget. He just doesn't.
Interesting.
He just doesn't. I don't think they have much of a relationship.
Huh. Well, it may be a case of then, if you know, from what I understand, Phil Fulmer is, you know, under the umbrella with Peyton, but that may be more of a function of the guy at the very top calling the shots.
Yes.
And it comes from on high. So maybe that speaks to Haslam's influence. So,
well, I would say this. I mean, I don't have knowledge of what you're talking about in terms of them canvassing or looking around or beginning to look around. But in a way, I mean, just thinking about that, because I don't think that's so. But in all fairness to you, kind of how could you not right now? At least
it's a contingency. It's a contingency.
I don't have knowledge of it. Again, I don't think those two have much of a relationship. But see, that's what you have here. You have a real confusing, almost convoluted, toxic stew of personalities. Too many chiefs, not enough Indians, the old saying, too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, you got so many cooks in the kitchen, and I'm not sure one of them can use a microwave. Really, that's where we are. And again, I'm back to this. This fan base deserves, if you could see this place, the other night, Florida game, I sit in my studio, Brooks, where I am right now, and we do our post-game show. I'm here for 6.5 hours. I go off the air. We have 3 calls, 1,000 people listening online, couple hundred more on Periscope, couple hundred more on YouTube Live, all those outlets. And Brooks, I walk away from that and I go, imagine if they won something, just a game every once in a while, not a championship. I'm just talking about how can there be that level of interest? Most fan bases turn it off. These people,
Georgia does. I went there.
Hey, Brooks, Florida's game wasn't even sold out, and they were 3-0. There were thousands of empty seats at the Saturday game. If Tennessee was 3-0, even as bad as Florida looks with their 4-0 start they're off to, this place would be a $300 buy-in to the next football game if they're 4-0. These people here deserve better, and that's the criminal part of this whole thing. The politics behind the scenes at this deal, though, I mean, it's never made much sense to me, and I don't know that it gets better.
Well, the story about Fulmer, and I know he's always out there with the coach's shorts in the office and whatnot, and projected as a coach, but the fact that he's that intimately intertwined,
and he is.
That's just an unhealthy situation, and it tells me that there's probably some truth to what Thamel's saying. But
either that, and I'm going, like I said, in all fairness to you, because everything here is kind of nuanced, right? So it could be that he hired a coach he knows in trouble, and he wants to help him.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you would think that, I mean, you wouldn't get that from the Pete Thamel article. He portrays it as the opposite. He's going to position himself to take over or to maintain.
I'm telling you, Curry wrote Pete Thamel's article, and I like Pete Thamel. But you and I both know these national guys march to the beat of those that bring them. Right.
The sourcing. Right. Sure. Well, hopefully, I want to drop back in on you, Tony, during the season. Make sure you guys are okay. All right.
Yeah, let's hope in 5 weeks we're all still here.
Yeah. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
That's Tony Basilio. He's in Knoxville, and he's a radio host on 99.7 WJBE in Knoxville. Tony Basilio Show, TonyBasilio.com. And his shows they stream on video on his Twitter feed, which let me get it. And his Twitter feed is Tony Basilio. It's Tony Basilio. And you just heard the guy. Incredibly candid. He's plugged in. He's a good guy. Well, what a great guy to have on the show and to have as one of our Tennessee guys. But that was a lot of fun. Very, very informative about Phil Fulmer particularly. So that's going to do it for today. I'm glad all y'all Tennessee fans checked in. Hope you'll come back tomorrow. We're going to keep talking college football. We got some surprises for you coming up, more surprises. We gave you some Florida State surprises today. You can bet. You can set your watch to what we're going to be doing every day, literally. We do it Monday through Friday, beginning at noon Eastern time. And so for my producer, Cam Smith at Boston, this is Brooks Melchior saying so long from Los Angeles. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.